Seo-jun had walked through 15 years of blood and silence without once breaking his stride. In the underworld of Seoul, his name was not really a name. It was a temperature. The kind of cold that arrived before he did, that settled into a room the moment his motorcade turned onto the block. Men who had survived wars, who had kept their nerve in dark rooms against loaded guns, found quiet reasons to face the other direction when his black vehicles rolled past. He had not built what he built through ambition alone. He had built it through the slow, surgical removal of every soft thing inside himself. Every memory. Every hesitation. Every last trace of the boy who once believed that power could be held without cost. Until all that remained was the charcoal wool coat, the still jaw, and the dark lattice of ink climbing his throat like a map to a place no one was ever meant to follow. But on a Tuesday morning, in the neon-wet streets of Myeongdong, the most dangerous man in Korea met something he had no protocol for. She was small. Maybe 7, maybe 8. A yellow rain jacket, faded at the elbows, hood pushed back so her face was completely open to the drizzle. Hair in 2 uneven knots. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't hesitating. She wasn't afraid. She was simply standing at the edge of the sidewalk as his motorcade slowed at the signal. Looking directly at the rear window of his vehicle with the fixed, patient certainty of someone who had been waiting a long time and had now confirmed that the wait was finally over. His head of security clocked her first. Logged it. Said nothing yet. In 15 years, Seo-jun's men had removed people from his path without ceremony. Rival scouts. Journalists whose ambitions exceeded their judgment. Undercover officers who had badly underestimated what they were walking toward. Not one of them had ever looked at his motorcade the way this child did. Wide open. Completely still. Her hands at her sides, one of them closed loosely around something she was not yet ready to put down. Nobody knew her name. Nobody knew why she was there. Nobody in that motorcade could explain what made 2 of his most experienced men reach for their radios before they had even fully processed what they were reacting to. Most of them thought she was lost. One thought she was bait. Seo-jun said nothing. He watched her through the tinted glass, jaw set, eyes unreadable, and felt something shift in the floor of himself. Something old. Something he had poured concrete over a long time ago and had not heard from since. Not fear. Unease. Stay with us, because this is not a story about a mafia boss. This is a story about a man who spent 15 years becoming untouchable, and the little girl who reached out her hand in the rain and touched him anyway. And what she was carrying in that closed fist. You are not prepared for it. Before we go any further, if this story is already pulling at you, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to Christine Romance Stories, and turn on your notifications. We drop new stories every single week and you do not want to be the last to know how this one ends. Every like, every comment, every new subscriber, it truly means the world to me. We are building something real here, together. Now. Back to the story. 15 years. That was how long Seo-jun had been the answer to a question nobody in Seoul's underworld dared ask twice. Not because the question was dangerous, though it was, but because the answer arrived before you even finished forming it. 3 black vehicles. Tinted glass. Men who moved like architecture, solid, deliberate, load-bearing. By the time most people registered what they were looking at, the motorcade had already passed and the street had already resumed its ordinary business. As if his presence was something the city simply processed and released. Necessary. Unremarkable. Constant. He had not built this through size or noise. He had built it through precision. Through the careful, sustained removal of every variable that made his world unpredictable. Every soft alliance that could be leveraged. Every visible preference that could become a target. Every trace of sentiment that could be read as weakness by men who spent their entire lives looking for exactly that. What remained after 15 years of that process was something that functioned with the clean efficiency of a machine. Responsive. Exact. And entirely without the kind of interior weather that made other men hesitate at the moments that mattered most. His coat was charcoal. his jaw was still. The ink at his throat moved when he moved, dark and elaborate, a record written in a language that needed no translation. In the neon-wet morning of Myeongdong, the street adjusted around his motorcade the way water adjusts around stone. Not dramatically. Without any acknowledgement that an adjustment was even being made. Simply. Completely. Without exception. Until the exception. He registered her on the second pass of his attention across the street. His mind catalogued the ordinary automatically the way it always did: taxi chrome, storefront glass, the white of a pedestrian's jacket catching the morning light at the wrong angle, and the girl did not fit the catalogue. Not because she was doing anything unusual. She was standing still, which was itself the problem. On a street moving with the compressed urgency of a Tuesday morning in one of Seoul's busiest corridors, stillness was a pattern. And Seo Jun's mind did not let patterns go unexamined. Yellow rain jacket. Hood down despite the drizzle. Hair in 2 uneven knots, damp at the edges. Her face turned toward his motorcade, not with the attention of a child who had noticed something bright or loud. It was focused. Directed. The attention of someone who had been looking for a specific thing and had finally found it. His security lead said nothing. He didn't need to. Seo Jun had already seen her. The signal changed. The motorcade moved. He looked back once through the rear window. She was still standing there, watching the vehicle grow smaller with the patient, unhurried certainty of someone who already knew this was not the last time. He looked back down at his documents. But the machine had taken its photograph. She appeared again on Thursday. Same jacket. Same knots. Same stillness, but closer this time. She was on the pavement outside the building in Gangnam where his 9 o'clock was scheduled, standing at a distance that was too precise to be accidental. Not close enough to trigger an immediate response from his outer security. Exactly close enough to be seen. His lead guard logged her as a stray child in the vicinity and moved on. Seo Jun read the perimeter report that evening, read the word stray, and felt the machine register a quiet objection it did not yet have language for. He authorized no action. He went to bed. He slept 3 hours, which was less than normal. By Saturday she was following the motorcade on foot through Insadong, small sneakers on wet pavement, maintaining a distance of roughly 30 meters with a consistency that should not have been possible for someone her size. His head of security suggested interception. Seo Jun sat with the suggestion for 4 full seconds, which was 4 seconds longer than he typically needed for decisions of that kind. Step out at the next light, he said finally. Talk to her. Don't touch her. Find out what she wants. His man crouched in front of her on the pavement. Said something. The girl's head tilted 1 slow degree, the way a person tilts their head when they are listening to something they already know the answer to. Her eyes moved past his shoulder, past the trailing vehicle, past the second car, and landed, with an accuracy that had no business existing, directly on Seo Jun through 3 layers of tinted glass and 30 meters of Saturday morning foot traffic. His jaw tightened. His man returned to the vehicle. Settled into his seat. 3 full seconds of silence before he delivered the information with the careful neutrality of someone who understood the precise weight of words in this car. She won't leave, sir. Seo Jun said nothing. Outside, the light changed. The motorcade moved. In the side mirror, growing smaller but never stopping, never turning, never responding in any way to the size or authority of what had just been presented to her, the girl kept walking. He got out of the car himself on Monday. No signal to the detail. He simply opened the door at a red light 2 blocks from his first meeting and walked back through traffic. Hands loose at his sides, face the way it always was. A closed door with no handle on the outside. He crossed the distance between them in full view of his motorcade, of the street, of the ordinary Monday morning that continued its business around them without ceremony. She saw him coming from 25 meters. She did not run. Up close, she was smaller than the distance had suggested. The yellow jacket had paint on the left cuff, pale blue, dried stiff. 1 shoelace was tied tighter than the other. A small healing scratch crossed her right cheekbone. Her eyes were dark and very open, and they held his approach without flinching. Without the instinctive recoil that even grown men who considered themselves brave couldn't help when Seo-jun closed distance with intention. She looked at him the way you look at something you have been moving toward for a very long time and have finally reached. He stopped in front of her. Look down. She looked up. Neither of them spoke for a moment. And then she did. She didn't say it loudly. She didn't say it the way people deliver lines they have rehearsed for an audience. She said it the way you state a fact that has been true for a long time, and you are simply tired of carrying it alone. You smell like my dead daddy. The street continued. A taxi horn. A distant construction rhythm. The city moving through its own business with perfect, unbothered indifference. Seo-jun did not move. Not because he was calculating a response. He was not calculating anything. The machine had gone quiet in a way it had not gone quiet in 15 years, not in any corridor, any negotiation, any room where the stakes were high and the margins were razor thin. It went quiet the way a very loud thing goes quiet when something louder arrives without warning. He knew that scent. He knew it because he had chosen it. A specific cologne, imported, cedar and dark amber, the kind that lingered in fabric and on skin long after you left the room. He had worn it for years. He was wearing it now. And he also knew, in the part of himself the machine could never fully cover, exactly which other man had worn it. His guards were still. One hand had moved toward a jacket. He raised 2 fingers without looking back. The hand withdrew. He looked at the girl in the yellow jacket. The paint on her cuff, the unevenly tied shoelaces, the scratch on her cheekbone that was healing quietly on its own, and he felt the floor of the last 15 years develop a crack it had not had 60 seconds ago. "Who sent you?" he said. His voice was level. She shook her head once. Clear. Unhurried. "Nobody," she said. He believed her immediately. Which was itself a kind of information. "What is your name?" "Melinda," she said. And then, after a pause that contained something enormous and carefully managed for someone her size, "Melinda Lunsford." He had his people run the name before his motorcade reached his next meeting. By the time he sat down across from his 9 o'clock, the first results were already coming in. By the time he returned to his office, he had a file. He read it once. Then he turned it face down on his desk and looked at the city below his window for a long time. Lunsford. The name connected, through 2 degrees of association his memory assembled without effort, to a man he had not thought about in years. Not because the man was forgettable. He wasn't. But Seo-jun had spent 15 years developing the discipline of not thinking about things that were already finished. The ledger moved on. That was the practice. That was how you stayed functional in the life he had chosen. The ledger, it was becoming apparent, had a different understanding of the word finished. He ordered a full background investigation through channels that moved quietly and returned thoroughly. He wanted everything: financial records, residential history, employment, school enrollment, medical records, anything that touched the name Lunsford in the last decade. He gave it 48 hours. His analyst returned in 36. The file on Maria Lunsford was not a long file. It didn't need to be. The story it told was one that repeated itself in the margins of cities like Seoul. In the spaces where official records didn't look closely enough to see the shape of what had actually happened to someone. It told it in the compressed language of gaps. Employment records that stopped and restarted at lower wages. An address history that moved steadily outward from the city's center toward its cheaper edges. A daughter enrolled in 3 different schools in 4 years. Maria Lunsford was 34 years old. She had been cleaning offices, hotel rooms, and private residences for the last 6 years, picking up shifts wherever she could find them, organizing her schedule around Melinda's school hours with the specific, meticulous precision of a woman who had no margin for error and had made herself into someone who did not make errors. She was currently working the early morning shift at a commercial building in Uido. A 40-minute commute each way on public transit. home before Melinda finished school. Starting again the next morning at 5. She had been doing this since the district restructured. Since the business her family had been connected to stopped existing under its original name and reappeared under new management with new documentation that was, to anyone who knew where to look, very clean and very intentional. Seo-jun read the file to its end. He looked at the photograph his analyst had pulled from a public record. Maria Lunsford, administrative photo, 3 years prior. She was looking at the camera with the expression of someone who had decided the appropriate way to face a camera was directly. Without performance. Without the brightness people manufacture when they want to appear untroubled. Her eyes were steady. Her jaw was set. She looked like a woman who had absorbed something enormous and had chosen, with full awareness of the choice, to continue standing. He looked at that photograph for longer than he looked at most things. Then he looked at the file on the man he had not thought about in years. The man whose cologne he had worn every single day since, not as a memorial. He had not known, or had not allowed himself to know, that the connection even existed. Simply as preference. As a scent that had become, over time, part of the texture of who he was. The crack in the floor was widening. He did not examine it yet. But it was there. And below the machine, in the part of him that had been quietly accumulating receipts for 15 years, something was beginning to understand what the total was going to look like when he finally sat down to read it. He put the files away. He buttoned his jacket. Outside, Seoul continued, neon and rain and the organized noise of a city that did not concern itself with the interior weather of the men moving through it. Somewhere in Uido, a woman was finishing her morning shift. Somewhere in a school that had already been changed twice, a girl in a yellow jacket was sitting in a classroom, carrying something in her closed fist that she had not yet finished delivering. And in an office 30 floors above a city he had spent 15 years building, Seo-jun stood at his window and looked at it all, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could honestly account for, that the city was looking back. If this story is already pulling at something in you, don't lose your place. Subscribe to Christine Romance Stories and hit the bell so you're here for every chapter. Drop a comment below and tell me, did you see where this was going? Or did Melinda surprise you? Every comment, every like, every new subscriber is how we keep building this together. Don't miss what comes next. He didn't sleep the night he finished reading. Not because the information was surprising. That was the part that stayed with him. Long after the city outside his window had gone through its darkest hours and begun its slow gray reassembly toward morning. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. The specific, quiet recognition of a man who has known something at a depth he refused to acknowledge, and is now watching it surface with the patient inevitability of something that was always going to arrive. He had simply been standing with his back to the water. The man's name was James Lunsford. He had been 31 years old. He ran a small transportation operation in what was then a transitional district on Seoul's southern edge. Not a rival in any meaningful sense. Not a threat. Not someone whose removal had required strategy or prolonged attention. He had simply occupied territory that Seo-jun's expanding network required, and he had declined, twice, to negotiate its transfer. And that had been the entirety of his significance in Seo-jun's accounting at the time. An obstacle. Obstacles had a single relevant characteristic: they were temporary. James Lunsford had been temporary. What the file added, what Seo-jun had not known and had not thought to ask, because after was not his department, after was simply the space that opened when an obstacle was removed and was immediately filled by the next relevant thing, was that James Lunsford had a wife. That her name was Maria. That at the time of his death, Maria Lunsford had been 23 years old and 4 months pregnant with a daughter she would name Melinda and raise completely alone in a city that had reorganized itself entirely around her loss without ever once acknowledging that the reorganization had a human cost that was still being paid. Seo-jun read this sitting at his desk at 2 in the morning. He read it twice. Then he closed the folder. The cologne on his jacket was cedar and dark amber. He had worn it for 11 years. He had selected it originally because it suited him, distinctive without being loud, matching the specific texture of the version of himself he had been constructing at the time. He had not known that James Lunsford wore it. He had not known because he had not asked anything about James Lunsford that was not operationally necessary. And the scent preferences of a man being removed from a ledger were not operationally necessary. He had worn it for 11 years. Melinda Lunsford had pressed her face toward a stranger on a Monday morning in Myeongdong, and the first thing her body had known, before her mind processed anything, before she had spoken a single word, was her father. The crack in the floor became something larger. Not a collapse, not yet. The machine was still running. Still maintaining the perimeter. Still processing the operational implications of what he now knew. But beneath the machine, in the space it had been covering for 15 years, the arithmetic was being rewritten without his permission. And the new total was not one he had a category for. He sat at the desk until 4. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and filed the thing that had surfaced into the only category available, pending, and went to his next meeting. But pending was not the same as buried. He had been burying things for 15 years and he knew the difference. Buried things stayed still. Pending things moved on their own schedule, in their own direction, and arrived when they chose to. This one arrived on a Wednesday evening. His analyst had continued pulling threads on the Lunsford name, expanding outward from Maria and Melinda into the fuller shape of what that family's life had looked like before and after. Seo Jun read it the way he read everything. Completely. Without rushing. Without looking away from the parts that were uncomfortable. Maria Lunsford had not simply lost a husband. She had lost the structural foundation of everything attached to him. The business. The residence they had been slowly building equity in. The network of small financial securities that people build over years of quiet, careful living. When the district restructured, when James's operation was absorbed into new management, Maria had been left with a 4-month pregnancy, a city that no longer had space for her in any of the places she had previously occupied, and the specific, total kind of starting over that has no map and no runway. She had rebuilt anyway. That was in the file too. In the quiet evidence of someone who had looked at complete loss and had chosen, without drama, without audience, to continue. The employment records. The school enrollments. The address changes that tracked the slow, incremental work of a woman moving her daughter through a city that owed them nothing and had made good on that debt consistently. She had never filed anything. Never contacted any authority. Never attempted to trace what had happened to her husband's business or connect its disappearance to any particular name. Whether this was because she didn't know, or because she knew and had concluded that knowing was a liability she simply couldn't afford, the file didn't say. The file only showed the surface. What was underneath it was a question Seo Jun found himself turning over in a way the machine could not redirect. He thought about Melinda on the pavement. The closed fist. The paint on the cuff of her yellow jacket. The scratch on her cheekbone that was healing on its own because there was no one who noticed it who also had the capacity to do anything about it. He thought about Maria finishing her shift at 5 in the morning and taking 40 minutes of public transit home to be there before her daughter woke up. He thought about the cologne. The guilt arrived without announcement, the way the worst things always arrive. Not as an event but as a condition. A change in the atmospheric pressure of his interior. Something that had been absent and was now present and showed no sign of departing. He did not have a name for it at first. The machine had no category for it. But it was there, occupying the space where the clean arithmetic used to sit, and it was heavy in the specific way things are heavy when they have been waiting a long time to be picked up. He did not act on it yet. Acting required clarity. Clarity required understanding the full shape of what he was dealing with before moving in any direction. This was how he had operated for 15 years, assessment before action, always, without exception. The practice had kept him alive and functional in an environment that punished imprecision. But the practice had also, he was beginning to understand, kept him from reading his own receipts. He was still in the process of reading them when the threat arrived. It came through his security network on a Thursday morning, flagged by an analyst monitoring the communication patterns of a rival operation based in Mapo. The flag was specific and it landed with the particular weight of information that cannot be scheduled. Someone in the MafiaRomance network had been asking questions about Melinda Lunsford. Not about Maria. Not about James. About the child. Her school. Her route home. Her schedule. Seo Jun read the flag standing at his desk and felt something happen in his chest that had no operational name, but produced an immediate and total clarity about what came next. He called his security lead before he had finished the page. The MafiaRomance network, a mid-tier operation that had been watching the boundaries of Seo Jun's territory for 2 years with patient, calculated attention, had apparently concluded that the girl represented an opportunity. They had seen him get out of his car on Monday morning. They had watched him cross the street and stand in front of a child and not move for 2 full minutes. In 15 years of observing his movements, they had never seen anything like it. And they had correctly identified it as significant, without correctly understanding what it meant. They thought she was leverage. They were going to move on a Friday. His analyst had intercepted enough of the communication to establish the timeline with confidence. They were going to collect her between school and home, in the 15-minute window when she walked alone from the transit stop to the building where Maria would be waiting. 15 minutes. A child in a yellow jacket on a street that did not know her name. Seo Jun stood at his window and looked at the city and felt the pending thing complete its arrival. Full. Total. Without the possibility of redirection. He made 4 calls in the following hour. Precise, specific, no excess language. By early afternoon, 2 of his most trusted people were positioned on the route between Melinda's school and her building. By evening, a 3rd was stationed outside the building itself. He did not tell Maria. He did not tell Melinda. He simply placed himself, through the extension of his reach, between the threat and the 2 people who did not know the threat existed. The MafiaRomance network sent 2 men on Friday afternoon. They did not reach the transit stop. The conversation that followed, conducted in a location of Seo Jun's choosing, with representatives of the MafiaRomance network who were cooperative in the way people become cooperative when the alternative has been made very concrete, was brief and final. The inquiry into the Lunsford family would not be revisited. The girl was not leverage. She was not a variable. She was not a name that would appear in any communication, any plan, any conversation in that network from this point forward. The understanding was delivered once. Clearly. In language that required no interpretation. It was understood. Seo Jun returned to his office afterward and sat behind his desk and looked at what he had just done. Not at the operational mechanics of it, those were routine. He looked at the decision underneath the mechanics. The decision that had not been strategic, had not been calculated, had not passed through the machine at any point in its formation. He had moved to protect them the way a body moves to protect something it has already decided matters, before the reasoning catches up, before the justification is assembled, in the immediate and total way of something that is simply true. She was the daughter of a man he had removed from a ledger 11 years ago. He had worn her father's cologne for 11 years without knowing it. She had walked toward him across a wet street and told him, in 7 words, what 15 years of clean arithmetic actually looked like from the outside. And he had placed 3 of his best people between her and the thing that wanted to use her. Not because it was strategically sound, it was, but that was not why. Because the alternative was not something the version of himself that had sat at a desk at 2 in the morning and read Maria Lunsford's file was capable of choosing. Something had shifted. Not completely, not in the clean, total way that makes for simple stories. The machine was still running. The organization was still the organization. 15 years of constructed architecture does not become something else between a Thursday and a Friday afternoon. But a direction had been established. Quiet and irreversible, the way directions establish themselves when a person stops moving away from something and begins, without announcement, to move toward it. He pulled Maria Lunsford's file from his drawer. He looked at the photograph again, the steady eyes, the set jaw, the expression of a woman who had decided to face whatever was in front of her directly and without performance. He thought about what it had cost her to do that for 11 years in a city that had taken everything and offered nothing in return. He thought about Melinda, age 7, walking 30 meters behind his motorcade with a closed fist and the particular courage of someone who has already lost enough that fear has become a luxury she cannot afford. He opened his desk drawer and removed a piece of paper. He wrote a single set of instructions. The beginning of a financial arrangement, structured through layers that would take time to build correctly, routed through channels that could not be traced to his name. Not a payment. There was no payment for what had been taken. An acknowledgement. The beginning of a sustained and quiet correction applied to one family in one district of a city full of families who had absorbed the cost of his arithmetic without ever being asked. It was a beginning. Only that. The kind of beginning that looks small from the outside and is enormous from the inside. The first receipt read. The first number acknowledged. The first step in a direction that was going to require him to become something the machine had no existing specifications for. He did not know yet what that would look like in full. He did not know what it would cost him, what it would require him to dismantle, what version of himself would remain when he finally finished reading everything he had been refusing to read. The organization would complicate it. The men who depended on the existing architecture would resist it. There would be nothing clean or simple about any of what came next. But Melinda Lunsford had stood on a pavement in the rain and pressed her face toward a stranger and told him he smelled like her father. And she had done it not with anger, not with accusation, but with the open, exhausted honesty of a child who simply needed someone who already knew her father to confirm that he had existed. That he had been real. That his disappearance had a shape that could be named. He owed her that. He owed her mother that. He owed them both considerably more than he currently had the architecture to deliver. But he would build the architecture. That was, in the end, what he had always been good at, constructing the structure that allowed something to exist that had not existed before. He had built the wrong thing for 15 years. He was going to build something different now. He buttoned his jacket, straightened his cuffs, and looked at the city one last time through the floor-to-ceiling glass. It looked the same as it always looked, dense and lit and running its own logic without any reference to what happened in the rooms above it. But he was not looking at it the same way. He was looking at it the way you look at something you built and are beginning to understand the full cost of. Which is different from any other way of looking at it. More honest. More heavy. And underneath the weight, in the part of himself the machine had been covering and was now, slowly, without fanfare, beginning to uncover something that was not relief and not peace, but was perhaps the precondition for both. The beginning of being answerable. The beginning, however long and difficult and unresolved, of becoming someone a girl in a yellow jacket could walk toward, without the walk being the bravest thing she had ever done. He had a long way to go. He knew that now. Without flinching. He picked up his phone and made the first call. That's the story of a man who built a throne on the wrong foundation, and a little girl who walked up to it in the rain and showed him exactly what it was made of. If this moved you, if you stayed all the way to the end, then you already know what to do. Subscribe to Christine Romance Stories, hit that bell so you never miss a new story, and drop a comment telling me which moment hit you the hardest. Was it the cologne? Was it the pavement? Or was it the moment he finally picked up that phone? Every like, every comment, every new subscriber is how we keep telling stories that actually mean something, together. We will see you in the next one.